Good evening, and I'm your host tonight, Cindy Hicks. I'm here with Lindsay Rosa, a master level clinician who works with children that are from Central America, and I'll let her tell you a little bit about herself. But before we begin tonight, I'm going to be speaking and interviewing Lindsay here about... Yes. Sorry, we're having some mic issues. Okay. Here. Apology about that. Anyways, Lindsay's going to explain to us what's happening in Honduras right now, and you're not getting it on the current news. And Lindsay will tell us about that. And it's heartbreaking, and we need you to understand why you should be involved in this issue and how it will eventually affect you, and we're all just two people away from being related to everybody in the world. And later on in the show, we'll have both of our daughters who have family and parents living in Central America, and your daughter is has lived in Honduras, and mine in Guatemala. So as we begin tonight, just tell us a little bit about yourself and why you'd like to tell people what's going on in Honduras.
Yeah. So I started traveling to Latin America at 13. I got involved in human rights work from a pretty young age. Anyway, when I was 13, I went to Peru to a children's home to work there. Started learning Spanish. As soon as I graduated from high school, I began traveling to Guatemala, where I worked in a children's home there for children who'd been abandoned or abused by their families. I did like 7 different trips to Guatemala, and with a focus on helping people, and that was always my goal in life. I think I kind of followed a similar trajectory that a lot of people do, where you start out with a heart to help those less fortunate, and then you start noticing the overwhelming needs that are out there, particularly in Latin America and other underdeveloped countries. And then I started asking questions as to why is there so much poverty? Why are these governments so corrupt? Why does it not matter how much any Honduran or Guatemalan person does to get ahead in life that they never can? Why is the system the way that it is? So I started asking those bigger questions. I also began traveling to Honduras. I've made 7 different trips to Honduras and spent time there and looking into the political systems and talking to people who are involved civically engaged in those countries, learning about the politics there. So I have quite a bit of travel experience in Latin America, and then I am, as you said, a master's level clinician, and I worked for 5 years here in Michigan with refugee minors, predominantly from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador.
How would you describe your time working there?
Well, I love my job and I love the kids I work with. I think that we don't always know how lucky we are in Grand Rapids to have such a vibrant refugee community, and how we are receiving some of the best people that are fleeing their countries. But really, I've worked with some amazingly wonderful, bright, intelligent young people that are coming here because, for example, and what we're mostly going to talk about today, Honduras has the highest murder rate in the world. So we have young people who refuse to participate in gang activities and then have to leave the country because if a gang member comes and tells you you have to do this for us and you refuse, then you're dead. You're on a hit list.
Yeah. I think a lot of times this show tonight is part of a series of Tiempo, Latino. And one of the things that I do is present this side of the show to a predominant English-only speaking audience. Not that bilingual folks can't engage us, but we really want to reach people that lack good information and facts. And one thing I like about doing presentations with you is that we discuss a lot of myths and do what I call myth busting. And I think a lot of times Americans assume that they shouldn't worry about it because they think people just don't care. They think people don't care about their country, so why should I? And I think it's really great that we're going to discuss this topic because people do care and they're dying because they do. And I think it's good that we can expose the truth and talk about what's going on.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I've heard this in the past from Americans here stateside that, you know, these immigrants coming here, they'll acknowledge that, yes, they're coming from poverty and danger, but they need to go back to their country and fix their country. And that's just shows the ignorance and the lack of understanding that most Americans have on Latin America and our history there, and why that's almost an impossible task for people, because the United States really has their thumb on Latin America, and there's no way forward for people with.
Yeah, many of the countries were doing quite well before the U.S. occupation came along. So I think you could
have had short periods where they've done well in defiance of U.S. rule of Latin America. So I'd like to go into, so we're talking about Honduras today. We're talking about the current political climate. But to understand that, we really have to go back 100 years or so to get the backdrop on U.S. history in Honduras. I have a little PowerPoint, and I don't know if that could be pulled up now.
Can we go to our clip? Here we go.
Yeah, so go ahead and move to the first slide, or the second slide. Honduras democracy to dictatorship. Go ahead and.
Here we go. We have the U.S. history in Honduras. Want to tell us about that?
Yeah, so the Honduras is actually the first country to have been coined the Banana Republic. So the United States in the 1800s, early 1900s, owned most of the fertile land in Central America, including in Honduras. And there were land grabs where the U.S. business owners or the United Fruit Company and so on went in and just took the fertile land and began producing. As a result, the locals naturally protested because that was their land. That was the land of the Honduran people that had been farming it.
And we should have just been happy with leasing it, but we wanted to own it instead.
No, the U.S. took it. The U.S. owned it and enforced that ownership with with our military, and that's our very active military, sending the Navy, sending active people straight to Honduras. Nowadays, we do things a little bit differently. We utilize the Honduran military to do the U.S.'s dirty work. But initially, it was actively the U.S. So I think I have up there in the early maybe is that my next slide? Oh yeah, there was about 7 U.S. military insurgents in the early to mid 1900s. So that would happen like with a local group of Hondurans would rise up and say, this is our land, or we want better wages, or we want to unionize, or we need to be treated fairly. Then the U.S. would send their troops in to quell any type of uprising. So historically, the U.S. has stopped Hondurans from, quote unquote, fixing their country or making their country better.
And allowing workers to organize for their rights.
And workers, environmentalists. And the U.S. has a big stake there. So historically, we with the banana trade and the fruit trade, but currently there's 150 U.S. companies in Honduras, and the U.S. accounts for 2/3 of the direct. I think I confused my slide there, but something got off on that slide. But we direct investments, direct foreign investments in the country. So we're the biggest foreign investors in Honduras. Honduras is a country that has a lot of resources. They have wood, they have fruit, they produce textiles in the maquilas, and
coffee,
lots of coffee,
cocoa.
And unfortunately, not a huge percent of that is owned by Hondurans. It's owned largely by the U.S., and then there's Japanese companies, there's Canadian companies. And not we, I don't like to say we because it's not really us, the American people, that prosper from that. It's the owners of these companies that prosper from that. And they have a big stake in making sure that laborers in Honduras don't unionize. They have a big financial stake, our U.S. investors, in making sure that environmentalists aren't able to enforce any environmental laws. So we continue to support basically right-wing dictatorships in Honduras that will do the bidding of the U.S. politicians who are paid by the heads of these companies. That was most poignant during the quote-unquote banana wars when the United Fruit Company lobbied extensively with the U.S. government to quell any type of uprising in Guatemala and all over Latin America, basically.
And the lobbying still continues through
still
every
continues.
presidency.
Every presidency. I think if there's a difference between Democrats and Republicans on this, it's that on the surface, Democrats will condemn right-wing military coups or dictatorships where Republicans will just openly support them, but Democrats behind back closed doors will still support them.
Well, yeah, some people would describe that as protecting investments, but really that means making sure workers don't have rights to organize. And I would say, like, when you do say we actually, I would say people that live in this country actually do benefit. We benefit from the cheap labor. We benefit from not livable wages. Yeah. I mean, we're not directly benefiting.
We lose. I mean, the people lose. The people here lose. The people there lose. The benefactories are really the CEOs and the movers and shakers in the world, the top 500. Because this is getting a little off topic, but when we move our factory jobs through NAFTA to other countries to take advantage of lax labor laws or lax environmental laws, we lose. We, the people, lose, and the people of Latin America ultimately lose when Walmart shows up because of NAFTA, and all of a sudden everyone shops at Walmart, and all the local family businesses can't compete and go out. So really everybody loses, and I think that's another kind of fallacy for the American people when we think, well, we have this large military presence across the globe, and we have this large military presence in Latin America, but that's what we need to get our bananas cheap. Buy fair trade bananas. They're not that much more expensive. You're not going to break the bank. We could create a system that works for everyone, but the system we have really only works for the top 1% or whatever you want to call them.
And I'm glad that you're touching on the topic of fair trade and what that means. And basically, for all of you at home, that means there is a little sticker that says fair trade, and it has a little picture of a person. And when you buy products with that label on it, your money is going towards jobs that create equity and support a sustainable lifestyle for a family. And they can, support their children on those wages. So, your coffee, your fruits, vegetables.
I think the fair trade banana brand is Turbana.
Okay.
I think so. But there's fair trade chocolate, fair trade coffee. It's more and more coming in, and
but I think it's important for people at home to know, they feel helpless, like this is going on, what can I do? So it's so good to make sure people have control over their money and pay attention to where they spend it, because your money is your power and your voice, and that seems like the only way to create change. But as we continue talking about Honduras,
so to keep moving forward, so historically the U.S. has utilized the very top tier of Honduran society, who the elite and our elite work together, and our government, to make sure that a system continues that only benefits them and doesn't benefit anyone else. So thanks to this history of oppression, of U.S. oppression in Honduras, Honduras currently has the highest murder rate in the world. It's the second poorest country in Central America.
And the first poorest country would be?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Probably Guatemala or
It
El
might be.
Salvador?
I'm not
Okay,
sure.
that's okay.
I know,
We'll just
but
keep moving forward.
and these, like El Salvador and Honduras kind of jockey for position as the most violent countries. Honduras or Guatemala, I think, is 5th on the list. It's all somewhat relative, but basically these stories of oppression of the U.S. Taking over the resources of a country and stealing those resources is something you can just copy and paste that story on almost any Latin American country.
It's very true.
So also, they're number one, in Honduras is number one in the murder of environmentalists. That's
right.
That is a picture of Berta Cáceres. She is a beloved Honduran environmentalist. She's shown there, I think, pointing at a river that she was working to protect. So different groups, like the palm oil is a big industry right now in Honduras, and the trees are not native to there. They suck up a lot of water. They'll plant them near rivers, and then the whole entire community's water source has been absorbed. It's a very bloody industry. One of their top palm oil producers was notorious for killing and murdering journalists or anyone that would try to expose his workers' conditions and what he was doing and his illegal tactics.
I just quickly want to say, for anybody looking for option number 2 on what to do, check your food labels. Everybody's wanting to make healthy changes in 2018. Palm oil is a really good thing to cut out of your diet.
Totally,
And
absolutely.
it has, when you do that, you're helping environmentally to do, support better things.
Yeah, read your labels. And I do this, and I live as palm oil free as possible. It's hard because when you start looking, it's in everything.
Oh yeah,
and that's
protein
such
bars.
a huge industry.
Yeah.
But it's a bad business for the environment. It's a bloody business from a humanitarian perspective.
Now, the issue with Berta was relatively recent. I mean, in the last 2 years. Would you like to tell us a little more about her?
So Berta Cáceres was actively pushing for better environmental protections in Honduras. She was murdered, and different military members have come out and confessed that she was on a hit list, but because of the system the U.S. has set up, the military really does the bidding of the elite and the big business that have no interest in having environmentalists make their lives more difficult or
cut their profits.
Cut their profits, inhibit their abilities to pollute everything. So she was murdered most likely by some military entity. The forces behind wanting to get rid of her track back to U.S. industry and even to Hillary Clinton herself. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but Berta Cáceres' daughter came to Philadelphia during the Democratic National Convention.
Yeah, that happened during the elections.
To speak out against Hillary Clinton on what she stated that was her role in a military coup that occurred in Honduras. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself. We're going to talk about the coup in 1 second. But it just shows you how sort of related all of this is. And we are so connected to the oppression and the perpetrators of the oppression that's happening in Honduras. We make it impossible for Hondurans to fix their own country. Our government makes it impossible for Hondurans to fix their own country.
Well, money is power, and when money's there and it doesn't belong to the people, it's obvious that that's going to take precedence. So, yeah. Would you like to go into a little bit of detail and tell the audience what a coup is, for those wondering?
Yeah. So, okay. So after the history of basically right-wing dictatorships and the elite ruling class of Honduras controlling their resources and protecting U.S. business interests there so that the U.S. government protects those politicians and that ruling class, a person named Mel Zelaya was elected in 2006, I think. or in 2005. So Mel Zelaya was from the leftist party, and he ran as a man of the people. And when he was elected, he did a number of things. He started a small Social Security program for elderly people, a very modest one. He improved the roads significantly. He built shelters along the sides of the roads for people, street vendors, to find refuge when it rains. He paid the electric bills for poorer families. He did a lot of social reforms that really helped the people of Honduras.
And as you know, when traveling in Central America, which we've both done, it's really hard to find a bathroom alongside the road.
Well, yeah, and I don't know if he built bathrooms, but he built little shelters at least from the rain, and that's another. But he was improving the infrastructure. The teachers were getting paid. He also did an audit of a lot of the big businesses in Honduras and collected unpaid taxes. And this made him a lot of enemies among the ruling class, and not someone, he was a leftist leader. He was okay with labor unions. He was trying to actually make things better. So he made powerful enemies, and they devised a military coup to throw him out of power. Now, you kind of have to understand all of the details behind this. Mel Zelaya was attempting to take a vote, have the people of Honduras take a vote to see if there was interest in changing the constitution to allow a president to run for a second term.
Oh, okay.
So in Honduras, their constitution only allows for single-term presidents.
That's good to know.
Lots of Hondurans think that isn't a good system because when you're constantly, if a president does well, they want to keep him. And when you're constantly changing government, particularly in Latin America, it's not just the president and the cabinet that changes. It's like every appointee, down to the teachers, every federal employee, like there's a lot of turnover.
Wow.
Which causes systems to not ever function well.
Yeah.
So he hadn't actually done anything. He was planning on leaving the presidency, but he was looking into that and defying some other politicians in pushing to have a vote about changing the Constitution to allow for a potential second term. I don't believe that it would have applied to him, but regardless, that was their excuse to say, well, he's a socialist and he's going to take over the country and never leave power. And so they enacted this coup. The coup was condemned by the United States, officially by the Obama administration. It was condemned by most of the Latin American countries, all of them, as far as I know, all of them. He was taken into an embassy and sought refuge in an embassy in his country. He was eventually kicked out of the country, came back in. Initially, they removed him from the country, the military coup. Eventually, he snuck back in and I think stayed in the Brazilian embassy. But what's interesting, getting back to Berta Cáceres and putting some of these pieces together, though the U.S. government, along with most other governments, publicly condemned this as a right-wing military coup, Mel Zelaya and Berta Cáceres and Berta's daughter have all stated that Hillary Clinton, behind back doors, supported this coup. She was a Secretary of Defense, I think, at the time. And according to them, the golpistas, or the members of the military and political members of this coup, contacted the U.S. government, let them know what they were planning on doing, and wanting to know if the U.S. would intervene. The U.S. owns Honduras. We have the biggest military in the world. If the U.S. doesn't want something to happen, it's not going to happen. If the U.S. intervened against this action, it wouldn't have happened.
Right.
So according to these sources, Hillary Clinton gave kind of the wink and the nudge that the U.S. wasn't going to intervene and to go on ahead. Republicans, like I said, openly, the minority leaders, they openly supported the coup. So that's where I say...
That's where protecting investments come in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if there's anything, it's hard, as a U.S. citizen, when you're looking at our parties to try and like pick anyone that's good. There's sort of no party that's really good. I mean, the only thing the Democrats could really say on their side is that they at least publicly condemned it and gave public support to Zelaya and pressured the new administration to allow him back into the country and to allow some freedoms. But behind back doors, the more you delve into this, the more you see that money talk. Money is what runs the world, and these big investors pull all of the strings, and their investments are always protected. Can you pull that back up one more second? I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss my last point there.
We're going to pull our PowerPoint slide back up, please. There we go.
Oh, I'm sorry, maybe, okay. No, I hit them all, sorry. So that's a picture of Mel Zelaya, though. That was the ousted leader. So that coup happened in 2009. Then in 2000, his replacement, Micheletti, took power for a number of months, and then they...
In 2010, you're talking?
Yes, and then they held more elections, and Pepe Lobo was elected, who was a right-wing politician. And at that time, so there's two parties in Honduras.
Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, there's the Nacionalistas. That's the right-wing
the
conservative.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. The nationalists. Yep. And then the Liberales that they factioned off after this military coup. There was a controversy among them because some of their leaders had participated in the coup, and they formed a third party, El Partido Libre.
Okay. Oh, so, I just want to let them know we're done with that slide.
Yeah, so you can pull it down. Sorry, you can pull it down. So the Partido Libre, I would compare it to the progressives here in the U.S., the sort of Bernie Sanders progressives. They're committed to
supporting human life.
Yeah, to unions, to environmentalists, to humanitarian causes, to a fair and free society, to democracy. And so then after, they couldn't win that next election because the party had been split and there was a lot of controversy. But then this past November, for the first time in Honduran history, they put forth a candidate, Nasralles, who was winning. I mean, that was unheard of. It's been unheard of in Honduras. They had put forth the Partido Libre got together, and Zelaya supported this candidate, Nasralles, who became very popular and probably won the elections. At this time, Honduras has a man named Juan. We can pull up the next slide. Juan Orlando Hernandez, who is...
Well, yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so Juan Orlando Hernandez was the president for 4 years. Now remember, he's from the Partido Nacional. The Partido Nacional, their excuse for the coup against Zelaya was that they were accusing him of wanting to run for a second term. He hadn't really done that, but they said that he was going to do that. So Juan Orlando Hernandez ran for a second term. So that's where like the big irony comes in. So when Juan Orlando Hernandez of the right-wing U.S.-backed Nacionalista Party came into power, he fired 4 out of the 5 Supreme Court judges, replaced them with his friends.
Wow.
And didn't change the Constitution. So the Constitution of Honduras still says that you can't run for a second term, but he just ran for a second term, and no one can sue him or deny because he now has the Supreme Court in his pocket. So he's just openly defying the Constitution, running for a second term, and that really sort of undoes the logic of the Nacionalistas' excuse for the coup against Zelaya.
The Liberals.
Yeah, what they accused him of wanting to do, they just did. So he ran for a second term. He believed he was going to win. Then in this past November, on election day, with 60% of the vote counted, there was this huge surprise that Salvador Nasralla, who is from the Partido Liberal, who is backed by Zelaya, the liberal progressive, we'll call him Honduras' Bernie Sanders,
Yes.
was up 5 points with 60% of the vote counted.
Wow.
So the win was in his hands. He really had it. At that point, Juan Orlando Hernandez stopped the votes from being counted. And there was just this total silence from the electoral people, and they just stopped counting for like 36 hours.
Oh, and I just want to interject really quick. For those of you who haven't traveled out of the country, it's really obvious who people support. The trees are painted with all of the person that they support for running for presidency. Communities make it really obvious. They paint everything, the side of houses and trees and rocks. I mean, it's very obvious wherever you travel that people will show their support openly for their candidates. So so you were saying that he was way ahead.
Yeah, so Nasralles won. I mean, there's been some different statistical analysis, but Juan Orlando stopped the counting of the vote for 36 hours when it was apparent that Nasralles was definitely winning. And all of a sudden, when the vote counting restarted, all of a sudden, Juan Orlando Hernandez started winning. So the international observers called foul to that. Different statistical analysis have showed that that's virtually impossible. They, gave some different excuses, but that didn't happen. I mean, there's really no question.
Right.
Juan Orlando Hernandez stole the election.
And it's very much against UN policy to interfere with any other country's elections. That's one of the basic rules that, the United Nations supports, is not interfering with other people's elections. So obviously there's some interference going on. It is what it is. At this point, Honduras has a dictator. He defied the Constitution. He clearly stole the election. There's no reasonable question of that. And then the response has been fury from the people. There's been a lot of protests. About 31 that we know of protesters have been killed in Honduras. And Juan Orlando, who is a strong military man, has used the military and the police to crack down on protesters in brutal ways. Would you like to tell us a little more about that?
I think they've killed 31 people that we know of. The families of those people have asserted that they've been threatened from speaking out about what happened to their family members. Presumably more people have been killed by the military that aren't speaking out on what happened due to those threats. But Juan Orlando was credited somewhat with lowering the crime rate in Honduras, but there's different ways to do things. And
would you like to explain? I think we both know how nationalists take care of that problem. Would you like to tell us?
Yeah, it's just the long arm of the law. The very one-sided, very harsh military approach to law enforcement. Firing
Squads, anyone with a tattoo of gang tattoos is just murdered in the street. I mean, in 2003 and 2002, we see a lot of that happening then. There's been a number of cases as well in Honduras of prisons catching fire and when they get overloaded and all of the prisoners burning to death. The hardcore right-wing military approach is a very bloody approach. It may be effective temporarily for short periods of time, but it's not going to solve. They've done it in different areas. They've done it in Mexico. It works for a while. It sort of pushes violence to another area. There pushes drug trafficking to another area temporarily, but it never solves the problem. And then the humanitarian cost of how are they going about lowering violence? How are they filling the prisoners? Right.
How are they doing any type of rehabilitation? Is the government providing alternatives to the drug trade for people for jobs? Because when you're on the one hand trying to quell the violence related to the drug trade, but also quelling any attempt by the people to unionize and create better living conditions so they can get reasonable jobs.
Right.
It's a self-defeating
And any
endeavor.
reasonable person can see that if your economy isn't providing jobs or sustainable jobs, the U.S. dollar is, and the demand for opioids right now is at an all-time high. And I had once done a show on the $40 billion business of the drug trade. And that, of course, pushes the violence, since the drugs need to traffic through South America into Central America. And, it creates a very violent situation for the people having to endure that. The U.S. demand for that.
Yeah, and that's really, I think we like to, it's just an interesting way, the way like conservatives attempt to look at the drug trade and say, we have our poor children here being enticed into drugs because they're just shoving these drugs into their throats and sending them from Latin America, when the reality is we've got the drug users, we've created the demand for drugs, which has created a bloody, bloody war in Latin America.
Right. I think it's just looked at crossways, looking at the suppliers as the problem, not the people who want it.
The demand creates the supply. The supply doesn't create the demand.
Exactly.
Our inability to control drug use has created the demand that's happening in Latin America.
Right.
And I did a presentation on this a long time ago when I was in grad school, about some $1 trillion that the U.S. has spent in the war on drugs since it was initiated, with zero effectiveness. The influx of drugs is the same that it's ever been, or higher.
It's higher.
There's no, that has just been money flushed down the toilet.
Right. The demand just keeps rising, and maybe.
And the predominant tactic has always been this one-sided, long arm of the law, hard type intervention, and that works sort of for a minute in one little area, because the drug dealers just go somewhere else, but it doesn't solve the problem. So Juan Orlando is that guy. He's using the military. He's using it by force. He's used it on the war on drugs, but now he's using it against his own people and anyone that protests his new founded dictatorship.
I like to call it the war on the poor, because that's what it is. There's no jobs, so you need to meet the demand, and the government's either like locking you up or killing you somewhere. I don't know. I think the same thing happens here, with the war on drugs. But anyways, we're focusing on Honduras today.
Yeah. So thank you for putting that up. So those are some pictures of protesters. There's been very significant protests across the country, and there will be again coming up as they get closer to the inauguration. I just want to read a few little quotes.
Do you know when that might happen, that inauguration?
I don't know off the top of my head. It's coming up within the next month or so.
Okay, just like ours, during the same time period.
Yeah, they're in their elections in November, and then the inauguration
in January.
I think it should be this month sometime.
Okay.
So those are the Hondurans fighting for their democracy. And it's a very sad, it's emotional for me looking at those pictures, because I know the desperation that they feel right now as they see what was left of their democracy, being flushed down the toilet, and having this short emotional high of the people's win, of having Nacionales winning the election kind of against all odds as a show of force from the people of Honduras, and then to have it ripped out of their hands just like that. So they're out on the streets protesting the government. The current administration has responded in force. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights made a statement saying that they were alarmed by the illegal and excessive use of force to disperse protesters by Hernandez's government.
And then can you tell us also like how our government has been responding as well?
Yeah, so we just support the dictator. Apparently Trump is
supporting investments?
Trump has supported Hernandez's administration. At least Obama kind of had the decency to publicly denounce what was, clearly a right-wing coup. Trump hasn't even had the decency to acknowledge that this is a dictatorship. Honduras has effectively lost their democracy. Their votes don't count.
Well, and we're funding it, correct?
The U.S. has sent about $114 million since 2009, since the coup in 2009, in aid to security forces.
And we're
So
still
our
sending
money, your tax money is going to support this crackdown on democracy.
Something we should be supporting democracy, not trying to quell it.
Yeah, we tend to support what we call democracy when it is in the best interest of U.S. business investments.
Right.
But not real democracy in Honduras would be a win for the Honduran people. It would be a loss for big U.S. investors.
Well, real democracy always benefits human beings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the crackdown has been brutal. One interesting thing that happened during the time of these protests, the government had directed the police as well as the military to crack down on the protesters. And at one point, the police, seeing the head of the Cobra, it's called, the head of the police in Honduras, saw how bad and how anti-democracy what they were doing was, and refused to participate. He actually came out, and the entire police force of Honduras refused to follow the government's instructions.
Wow.
And stated that these people have the right to be out here and to be protesting.
Good for them. That
Yeah.
takes a lot to stand up when your life's on the line.
I wonder how long the chief of police is going to be, I wonder how long he's going to hold that position. But the police actually eventually refused to continue to do the government's bidding.
That's good. We need to be supportive of them and not of the security forces.
Yeah.
So
now they're relying on the military, and additionally, I think it's worth noting that the U.S. has a military training camp in Honduras, in Comayagua, Honduras, and has directly trained one of their top military leaders that Hernandez appointed to be in charge.
probably Fort Benning, Georgia. Is that where they're trained at?
Well, that's the School of the America, the
yeah, the
School of the
former
Americas. And
yeah,
then
it
this
has a
is
new name now. Just so the
West,
audience.
yeah, it's like the Western Hemisphere or something. They made it confusing, but yeah, the School of the Americas. If you didn't know, the U.S. trains Latin American countries and right-wing dictatorships in how to maintain their right-wing dictatorships. And the participants in the coup against Z.E.E. in 2009, many of them were trained by the U.S. The current head of the military, now appointed by Hernandez, was trained by the U.S. And what they're using their training for is to quell any real show of democracy. So that's where your tax money goes.
Yes.
So I think I had a little video clip I wanted to show. I don't know if it's possible
Can we
to
roll
pull it
that,
up.
please? That video that we have.
Protesters made their way across the city of Tegucigalpa on Sunday, answering a call by opposition leaders who have asked supporters across the country to march.
There are thousands of people on the streets of the city demanding that the National Elections Commission be forthcoming with a decision. They're also calling for Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez to step down.
Demonstrators express a general mistrust of the National Elections Commission, making the job of international observers all the more valuable.
Get that volume.
We want the recount to be fair. No matter who wins, we will accept it, but not with election fraud.
We won't allow him to be president. We won't obey his orders. We want to remove this repressive government. The people of Honduras have woken up, and we are tired of what's been done to us over the last 8 years.
There's a large military presence in the city, enforcing a strict 6 p.m. curfew. The Honduran military's response to a wave of violence and looting that gripped the country in recent days. At least 3 people were killed and dozens others injured. It's now been a week since the general election, and while peace has returned to the city, the concern remains that as long as the political limbo continues, violence could spark up once again. Manuel Rapalo, Al Jazeera, Tegucigalpa. Protesters made their way across the city of Tegucigalpa on Sunday, answering a call by opposition leaders who have asked supporters across the country to
Can you
march.
see if that volume
There are thousands of people on the streets of the city demanding that the
Wow. Can you share a little bit about what the people were saying and?
Yeah, they're saying fuera JOH, which is out Juan Orlando Hernandez. Those are the people taking to the streets, trying to push the government to honor to be transparent in the election process and honor what the real results were.
And I think we can see that there is a large participatory crowd. It seemed that very evident that the streets are just filled with people.
There have been very large, very consistent protests in Honduras since the time that Juan Orlando stopped the counting of the ballots. At that time, the people knew that he was committing electoral fraud.
Wow, it's not good.
Yeah.
So, how do you think that people at home? What would you say to people at home that, why would you tell them they should care, or how does this affect them?
This affects us right here in West Michigan in a lot of ways. One is that we're receiving refugees from Honduras, and I think the irony to me of the hard right, on the one hand, supporting these dictatorships that make life impossible for people in Latin America, on the other hand, rejecting the refugees that are coming as a result of the conditions that have been created in Latin America.
Yeah. Would you like to tell the audience at home how many people actually qualified for asylum from Central American countries?
Oh, yeah.
Because everybody just says, well, they should qualify for asylum. That's all I hear, and I know that that's not true.
Our asylum laws are tricky. I mean, right now, currently, one of the problems is that the U.S. Border Patrol is breaking international law by not allowing asylum seekers into the country. They're turning people away,
especially minors.
I don't know if they're turning minors away. They are turning minors away. Actually, I've worked with kids who were sent back who had legitimate asylum cases. But international law says that people have the right to enter the country and apply for asylum. They don't necessarily win, but they have the right to come in and say, if my life is in danger, and apply for asylum. At this point, we have so many asylum seekers coming from Latin America because of the situations that we've created through supporting right-wing military dictatorships, because of the war on drugs.
A demand for our young.
That the recent reports were that at the U.S. border with Mexico, they're actually sending Latin Americans back, and a lot of these people are from Honduras, from El Salvador, from Guatemala.
Would you like to tell the audience what happens to people when they get sent back? Because I know I've researched that, and very few people actually make it past the first 3 months once they're returned.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you have some experience in that.
Yeah, people are legitimately running for their lives, and the U.S. definitely deports people straight to their deaths. We've always done that. We're doing that now currently. That includes children. Minors who come, minors function under the same asylum laws as adults. And the way our asylum laws are written at this time makes it very difficult for people to win their cases. Our current asylum laws state that you have to be part of being persecuted as part of a special people group, and it has to be government-sponsored persecution. A lot of the kids coming right now are running from gang violence. That is ultimately created because of this larger system that we're talking about, this right. Conditions the U.S. has helped create and sustain in Latin America. So you have a kid, for example, who's being pressured to join a gang. He doesn't want to do it. He has to leave. And that he could prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this gang is going to kill him when he gets back, but doesn't make him part of a special people group. That doesn't constitute necessarily government-sponsored violence.
Right, that's happening to about 90% of the youth in Honduras right now.
Yeah, so they're not in a good place to even win an asylum case, so they could, again, prove to the judge that they're going to be killed, and the judge will still often send them back and to be killed. And I know that there at least one that I know of youth from West Michigan that was deported back to Honduras, and within a couple days was tortured and killed.
Wow. And I would like to let the audience know, a lot of times people think that immigrants and refugee seekers get free lawyers.
No.
There's even been 2-year-olds that have had to defend themselves in immigration court on their own.
There's been
nobody gets a free lawyer.
Babies deported on the basis that the judge said they were here to work. Babies. I mean, yeah. Our system, our asylum system, isn't a system that works consistently to preserve life.
It's definitely not consistent, and people don't get free lawyers. That's typically reserved here for local courts, state, county, but not federal immigration cases. You're on your own.
Yeah, and it just heightens the hypocrisy of the situation we're in. I think, if you break it, you buy it. And we've helped break Latin America. We've continued to quell any attempt they have made to better conditions. People don't want to leave their friends and family behind. People don't want to leave their entire lives just for the heck of it. They're coming for really, really real reasons. Yeah. And reasons that we've created and continue to sustain. Yeah. So if you want to continue oppressing Latin America, then accept the refugees. But you really can't have it both ways.
Oh, and at this point in time, we did have 2 extra little guests that wanted to join us today. So we'll see if they can be brought in. Can you check and see if the guests are ready to come in and join us? And we're waiting for 2 little guests.
And in the meantime, I did want to talk about another way that this is related to West Michigan. Calvin College has a group called Association for More Just Society, AJS. This has been they're a group that has a presence in Honduras and supposedly has been working for justice, for the sake of justice. This group has, to date, that I'm aware of, refused to recognize, here they come. Hi, girls. Hi. They've refused to recognize the Nacionalistas and Juan Orlando Hernandez as the dictator that he is. This group receives a reasonable amount of money and financial support from our area.
Oh, yeah.
And it's and being a justice group, ultimately they are supporting the biggest injustice that's currently happening in Honduras with their silence and with the refusal to recognize this party and this current administration as the dictatorship that it is.
Wow. And we have 2 more little guests. We have Lily Rosa and Celia Chavarria Hicks. And Lily, we're going to ask you a quick question. Your daddy is in Honduras right now, helping to fight with, Oh,
so
where's your dad from?
Honduras.
Honduras. And what is he doing now?
Helping the protesters.
Wow. How does that make you feel?
Kind of scared.
Yeah, that's scary.
It is.
Yeah. And you lived in Honduras, didn't you? When you were little? For a year and a half? 2 years?
I don't know.
About a year.
Wow.
She was there for about a year. Yeah.
And Celia, you recently lived in Guatemala, didn't you? For a year and a half. And you lived with your dad. And did you see any protests while you were there, or people coming together? No, they kept you kind of away from that. But you knew that your aunts had to fight for getting their paycheck. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to wrap this up as we're heading into the end of things, but we would like to encourage people to call on Calvin College's program and bring that up to their social justice department. And any other things that you'd like to tell us as we're wrapping this up?
Oh, well, it's nice having the girls here. I think Latin America is closer to home than we realize. There's a lot of those Americans that don't know where Honduras is, but we have a reasonably large Honduran population right here in West Michigan. We have a Guatemalan population here, and they're hurting knowing that they're losing their democracy in their countries. So call your politician, call your representative, and tell them to publicly condemn the dictatorship.
And Bill Huizinga is along the Newaygo County, Ottawa County area rep. His family's been to Honduras, so I know that he would probably totally get this, but people need to make their side clear.
And it's amazing how the Republicans and the right-wingers are not on any level
And Justin Amash is our representative here too.
Yeah, because the corporate money is behind them, and so it's controversial for them to call a duck a duck and recognize what's actually happening. But Honduras has, to this point, lost their democracy, and they're under a dictatorship, and the U.S. government needs to represent that and to state that and recognize that. And we need our representatives we need to contact our representatives so that they hear our voices too. And we need to continue to educate our population.
That's why they're elected. They need to hear from you. It's free. All you have to do is go on the internet and type in "call my rep," and your number will pop up with your zip code. And I'd like to thank all my guests today. Tiempo Latino is also a part of the Society for Economic Equality, and this show has been running live for the past 20 plus years. And we appreciate you tuning in to educate yourself on issues abroad and locally, and to learn how to get involved with social justice and a more equitable society. So thank you for joining us. I'm Cindy Hicks. This is Lindsay Rosa. And you can find us typically around protesting against injustice.
Yeah, anyone's welcome to look me up on Facebook if you have additional questions on the situation in Honduras.
Yeah, and tune in for shows in Spanish with Tiempo Latino with Pablo Bello. He caters to a Spanish-speaking audience, and we like to help you understand from a different perspective as well. I want to thank Lily and Celia. You can wave hi, say bye. So thank you for tuning in. It's a pleasure to bring this education to people. And we even did it with a sore throat.